The massive alien building buzzed with worry as hundreds of different creatures talked in hushed voices. Some had 4 arms, others had wings, and many looked nothing like anything from Earth. They all belonged to the Galactic Council, a group that controlled trade between planets across the galaxy. Ambassador Trell sat in his special chair made for his spider-like body. His 8 legs clicked on the floor as he moved, and his 4 yellow eyes gleamed with something that looked like hate. He had been waiting for this day for months. Today, he would finally get rid of the human problem once and for all. The humans sat quietly at their table across the room. They wore simple blue uniforms and looked calm, but Trell could sense they were nervous. Good. They should be nervous about what was coming. "The meeting will now begin," announced the council's computer. Voice in 1,000 different languages at once. Every creature in the room had a small device that translated the words into sounds they could understand. Trell stood up on his 8 legs and spoke loudly. "Fellow council members, we are here to discuss the human request to join our trade network. As you know, I have serious concerns about allowing this new species into our group." A tall crystal being named Quex sparkled as he spoke. "Ambassador Trell, humans have shown they are peaceful and smart. Why do you object to their membership?" "Because they are weak," Trell replied, his voice full of disgust. "Look at them. They have no claws, no poison, no thick skin. They come from just one small planet and claim they can survive anywhere. This is clearly false." The human leader, a middle-aged man named David Stone, stood up slowly. He had gray hair and kind eyes, but his voice was firm when he spoke. "Ambassador Trell, humans have survived in many harsh places. We have lived in frozen lands, hot deserts, and dangerous jungles. We adapt to new situations very well." Trell made a sound like an angry insect. "Adapt? Your species has never faced real danger. You have never been tested against environments that kill everything else. How can we trust you to handle our trade routes when you might die at the first sign of trouble?" Other council members began to whisper among themselves. Some agreed with Trell, others supported the humans. The room filled with the sound of clicking, chirping, and humming as different species talked in their own languages. "I have a solution," Trell announced, and the room went quiet. "If humans truly believe they can survive anywhere, let them prove it. I propose a test." David Stone felt his heart beat faster, but he kept his face calm. "What kind of test?" Trell's 4 eyes glowed brighter. "There is a moon called Verdania that orbits a planet in the outer rim. It is covered in jungle, but this jungle is different from anything on Earth. The air itself will burn your lungs. The plants produce acid that melts metal. The animals are so dangerous that we have no records of them because nothing we send there ever comes back." A creature that looked like a floating jellyfish spoke up. "Trell, that seems too extreme. Verdania has killed exploration teams from dozens of species. Even our best environmental suits fail there within hours." "Exactly," Trell said with satisfaction. "If humans are as adaptable as they claim, this should be easy for them. Send 1 human to Verdania with basic supplies. If they can survive for 7 days and bring back proof of useful resources, we will consider their application. If they fail—" He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. Dr. Emily Carter, the human team's scientist, leaned over to whisper to David. "The data we have on Verdania is terrible. The atmospheric readings show poison levels that should kill most known life forms in minutes. The plant samples we've seen literally eat through our strongest materials." David nodded but spoke to the council. "We need some time to discuss this challenge." "Of course," Trell replied, not trying to hide his smile. "Take all the time you need. But remember, refusal to accept this test will be seen as proof that humans are not ready for galactic trade." The human team gathered in a small room next to the main chamber. 5 people sat around a simple table, looking at data screens full of scary information about Verdania. "This is a suicide mission," said Dr. Carter, pointing at the atmospheric readings. "Look at these numbers. The air contains at least 40 different types of poison. The humidity is so high that most electronics will fail immediately. And we have no idea what kind of creatures live there because, like Trell said, nothing ever comes back." Tom Bradley, a tough-looking man with scars on his hands, spoke up. "I'll do it." Everyone turned to look at him. Tom was their survival expert, a former soldier who had lived in dangerous places all over Earth and on several colony worlds. "Tom, this isn't like surviving in Earth's Amazon jungle or even on one of our mining worlds," David said carefully. "This place is designed to kill anything that doesn't belong there." Tom shrugged. "Every place is designed to kill things that don't belong there. Earth tried to kill humans for millions of years before we figured out how to live with it. How different can one alien jungle be?" Dr. Carter pulled up more data. "Very different. The chemical composition alone shows compounds we've never seen before. Some of them seem to attack organic matter at the molecular level. Others appear to interfere with brain function in ways we don't understand." "But I'll have protective gear, right?" Tom asked. "Yes, but our best estimates suggest it will only last 12 to 18 hours in that environment. After that, you'll be completely exposed to whatever Verdania wants to do to you." Tom was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he smiled. "You know what the difference is between humans and most other species in the galaxy?" "What?" David asked. "They evolved on planets that were mostly safe. Sure, they had some dangers, but nothing like Earth. Earth spent millions of years throwing everything it had at early humans. Ice ages, diseases, predators, volcanoes, floods, droughts, every possible way to die, Earth tried to kill us with it. But we didn't die. We got stronger." He stood up and looked at each person in the room. "Every other species I've met has some special ability, thick skin, or poison, or the ability to breathe different types of air. Humans don't have any of that. You know what we have instead?" "What?" Dr. Carter asked, even though she was starting to understand. "We have the ability to survive in places where we're not supposed to survive. We're the species that looked at frozen wastelands and figured out how to live there. We saw deadly deserts and made them our home. We found ways to live underwater, underground, and in the vacuum of space. Surviving in impossible places is what humans do best." David Stone looked at his team. Tom was right, but this was still incredibly dangerous. If Tom died on Verdania, it wouldn't just end human hopes of joining the Galactic Council. It would prove to everyone that humans were weak. "Are you sure about this, Tom?" David asked. Tom grinned. "Absolutely. Besides, I'm curious to see what this jungle looks like. How bad can it really be?" 3 hours later, Tom was suited up in humanity's best environmental protection gear, carrying a small pack of supplies and scientific equipment. The other council members watched as he prepared to leave for Verdania. "Remember," Trell called out as Tom walked toward his transport ship, 7 days, and you must bring back proof that the moon has useful resources." Tom waved without looking back. "See you in a week." As his ship disappeared into space, heading toward a moon that had killed everything else that tried to land there, the council members began placing bets on whether they would ever see the human again. Trell was confident. They would not. Tom's small transport ship shook violently as it dropped through Verdania's thick atmosphere. Red warning lights flashed all over the control panel, and the computer's voice kept repeating the same message over and over. "Danger. Hull damage. Detected. Recommend immediate abort." Through the front window, Tom could see why the computer was so worried. The air outside wasn't just thick with clouds. It was thick with something that looked like green fog. And wherever this fog touched, his ship, the metal started to change color and develop holes. "Well, that's not good," Tom said to himself, watching his ship's outer layer slowly dissolve. The atmospheric readings on his screen showed numbers that should have been impossible. The air contained so many different poisons that his computer had stopped trying to list them all. The jungle below looked like something from a nightmare. Instead of the normal green that Tom expected, the plants were every color except normal. Purple trees twisted up toward the sky like giant corkscrews. Orange grass that seemed to move on its own covered the ground. Flowers the size of houses, opened and closed like mouths full of teeth. As his ship got closer to the ground, Tom could see that the jungle was not just colorful. It was alive in a way that no forest on Earth had ever been alive. Vines reached up toward his ship like arms, trying to grab it. Plants seemed to communicate with each other, changing colors in waves that spread across the landscape. "Computer, find me a safe landing spot," Tom ordered. "No safe landing spots detected," the computer replied immediately. "All areas show hostile biological activity." "Then find me the least dangerous landing spot." "All areas equally dangerous. Recommend immediate departure." Tom sighed and took manual control of the ship. "Computer, you're fired. I'll land this thing myself." He picked a clearing that looked slightly less hostile than everywhere else and aimed for it. As soon as his ship entered the clearing's airspace, the jungle's response was immediate and terrifying. Plants that had looked peaceful suddenly erupted into motion. Vines shot up from the ground like green rockets. Trees began firing something. That looked like thorns but moved too fast to be natural. Flowers opened to reveal not petals, but rows of needle-sharp teeth. Tom's ship hit the ground hard, bouncing twice before coming to a stop. Immediately, the jungle began trying to eat it. Acidic sap from nearby trees splashed against the hull, making it smoke and bubble. Vines wrapped around the landing legs and started to squeeze. Root systems that must have been just under the surface erupted upward, trying to drag the ship underground. "Okay," Tom said, putting on his environmental suit. "That's definitely not normal jungle behavior." His suit was the most advanced protection that human technology could build. It was designed to keep him alive in the vacuum of space, underwater, in extreme heat or cold, and in atmospheres full of poison. According to the engineers who built it, nothing could get through its barriers. Tom hoped they were right. He sealed his helmet and checked all his systems. Oxygen supply, good for 72 hours. Environmental filters, working normally. Protective barriers, fully charged. Communication system, trying to connect with his ship, but getting interference from the jungle's strange electromagnetic activity. "Well, here goes nothing," Tom said and opened the ship's door. The jungle hit him immediately. Not just the sight or sound of it, but the feeling. Even through his suit's protection, Tom could sense that this place was fundamentally different from anywhere he had ever been. The air itself seemed thick and hungry. Colors that his eyes couldn't quite process made everything look slightly wrong, like he was seeing the world through someone else's vision. His suit's sensors went crazy. Warnings popped up on his helmet display faster than he could read them. The atmospheric analysis showed poison levels that should have killed him instantly, even with protection. But he was still breathing, still standing, still alive. The plants around his ship watched him with what could only be described as interest. Tom had seen aggressive plants before on other worlds, but these were different. They didn't just react to his presence. They seemed to be studying him, trying to figure out what he was and whether he was a threat. A tree near his left shoulder fired a thorn that hit his suit's arm section. Instead of bouncing off or breaking, the thorn stuck and immediately began to dissolve the protective material. Tom pulled it out quickly, but he could see that his suit was already damaged. "Day 1, mission log," he said into his helmet recorder. "Landed safely if you can call having your ship attacked by the local plant life safe. Suit integrity is already compromised, and I've been here for exactly 3 minutes. The jungle is definitely hostile, but it's also clearly intelligent. The plants are coordinating their attacks." He started walking away from his ship, carrying his pack of supplies and scientific equipment. Behind him, the jungle continued its attempt to consume his transport. Vines had already covered most of it, and the metal was changing colors as various acids and biological compounds went to work. The first day was like walking through a living maze that wanted to kill him. Every step revealed new dangers. Flowers that looked beautiful from a distance turned out to be traps that snapped shut when anything came close. Streams of water that seemed clean and fresh were actually so full of corrosive chemicals that they dissolved his sample containers in seconds. Even the air seemed to be trying to eat his suit from the outside while poisoning him from the inside. But Tom kept walking, kept taking notes, and kept breathing. His suit's filters were working harder than they were designed to, and his environmental systems were showing stress levels that should have meant system failure. But they kept working anyway, probably because human engineers had learned long ago to overbuild everything for survival situations. By evening, Tom had traveled about 5 miles from his landing site. His suit looked like it had been through a war. Acid burns covered most of the surface. Several filters had failed and been replaced. The heads-up display in his helmet flickered occasionally, showing signs of electronic interference from the jungle's bizarre electromagnetic field. He found shelter in a cave that seemed less aggressive than the surrounding jungle. The rocks inside were covered with some kind of slime that glowed softly, providing light but also probably trying to digest anything it touched. Tom set up his camp carefully, making sure nothing important came into contact with the local biology. End of day 1, he recorded. Suit integrity down to about 40%. I've identified at least 20 different types of hostile plant life, and I have the feeling I've only seen the beginning. Water sources are all contaminated with compounds I can't identify. Food sources are unknown and probably deadly. But I'm alive, and the mission continues. He didn't mention in his official log that he was starting to understand the jungle's patterns. The attacks weren't random. The plants seemed to be testing him, trying to figure out what he was made of and how he worked. It reminded him of the way Earth's ecosystems had challenged early humans, forcing them to adapt or die. But there was something else, something he couldn't quite put into words. Despite all the danger, despite the constant attempts to dissolve or poison or eat him, Tom was starting to feel like the jungle wasn't really trying to kill him. It was trying to understand him. That night, as he lay in his sleeping bag surrounded by glowing slime and listening to the sounds of a jungle that never slept, Tom began to wonder if he was approaching this all wrong. Maybe the jungle wasn't his enemy. Maybe it was just very, very careful about who it let join its community. Outside his cave, something howled in the distance. It was a sound unlike anything Tom had ever heard, full of intelligence and loneliness and something that might have been hope. Tom smiled in his helmet and went to sleep, dreaming of impossible colors and plants that might not be as hostile as they seemed. Tom woke up on his 3rd day to find his environmental suit completely dead. The filters had finally given up during the night, clogged beyond any hope of repair. The protective barriers that had kept Verdania's poisonous atmosphere away from his skin had failed sometime around dawn. His helmet's display showed nothing but error messages before going completely black. According to every piece of scientific data the humans had about Verdania, Tom should have died hours ago. The air was full of compounds that dissolved organic tissue. The humidity contained acids that broke down complex proteins. Even the light from Verdania's sun carried radiation that was supposed to be deadly to most forms of life. But Tom was still breathing. His lungs burned and his eyes watered. But he was alive. He sat up carefully in his cave and took stock of his situation. His suit was now just dead weight, so he started removing pieces of it. The outer shell came off first, showing massive damage from the jungle's constant chemical attacks. The inner layers were in better shape, but still failing. Soon, he was down to just his basic clothes and whatever emergency supplies he could carry. Day 3, he said to his handheld recorder, which was somehow still working despite everything. Environmental suit has completely failed. I am now breathing Verdania's atmosphere directly. According to all our data, I should be dead. Instead, I feel terrible but functional, beginning to think our data might be incomplete. He packed his remaining supplies and left the cave. The jungle morning was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The air was thick and warm and tasted like metal and flowers mixed together. Colors that had no names painted everything in ways that made his brain struggle to process what he was seeing. But he could see, and he could breathe, and he could walk. The jungle's behavior had changed, too. The plants still watched him as he moved, but they seemed less aggressive than before. A vine that reached toward him pulled back when he said, "No, thank you," in a firm voice. A flower that opened its tooth-filled mouth in his direction actually seemed to listen when he explained that he was just passing through. It was on the 4th day that Tom met his first friend. He had been following what looked like an animal trail through a section of jungle filled with trees that hummed in harmony with each other. The trail led to a small clearing where a stream of relatively clean water flowed over rocks that glowed with soft blue light. Tom was kneeling by the stream trying to figure out if the water was safe to drink when he heard a small sound behind him. He turned around slowly and found himself looking at a creature that was like nothing in any Earth database. It was about the size of a large cat, but it had 6 legs instead of 4. Its body was covered in scales that changed color as Tom watched, shifting from green to blue to purple like a living rainbow. Its head was larger than a cat's head, with big eyes that looked remarkably intelligent. Most importantly, it didn't look like it wanted to eat him. "Hello there," Tom said softly, the way he had always talked to stray animals back on Earth. The creature tilted its head and made a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a chirp. Its scales shifted to brighter colors, and it took a careful step closer. Tom held very still. He had learned long ago that the best way to deal with unknown animals was to let them make the first move. The creature studied him for a long moment, then approached cautiously. When it was close enough, it stretched out its neck and sniffed Tom's outstretched hand. What happened next was completely unexpected. The creature began to groom Tom's hand with its tongue, and wherever its saliva touched Tom's skin, the constant burning sensation he had been feeling since his suit failed began to fade away. "Well, aren't you helpful?" Tom said with amazement. The creature's saliva seemed to neutralize the very toxins that should have been killing him. "I think I'll call you Rex." Rex seemed to like the name. His scales brightened to a warm golden color, and he continued his grooming work, paying special attention to areas where Tom's skin looked red or irritated from chemical exposure. Within an hour, Tom felt better than he had since landing on Verdania. The burning in his lungs had eased. His eyes had stopped watering. Even his headache, which he had assumed was from breathing poisonous air, had disappeared. "You're not just being friendly," Tom realized. "You're helping me survive here." "But why?" Rex looked up at him with those intelligent eyes and made a sound that Tom could only interpret as happiness. Then he trotted a few steps away and looked back, clearly indicating that Tom should follow. Rex led him to something that Tom had never expected to find on Verdania, a community. The clearing was hidden deep in the jungle, surrounded by trees that glowed with soft, bioluminescent light. In the center, dozens of creatures like Rex were going about their daily lives. Some were tending to gardens of strange plants that grew in perfect geometric patterns. Others were working with tools that seemed to be made from living wood and shaped metal. All of them stopped what they were doing when Tom appeared. For a moment, Tom wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Being surrounded by unknown alien creatures while completely defenseless seemed like a good way to become someone's dinner. But Rex chirped loudly to the others, and their response was not aggression, but curiosity. One by one, they approached, Tom with the same careful interest that Rex had shown. They sniffed him, examined his clothes and equipment, and began the same grooming behavior that Rex had started. Soon Tom found himself at the center of what could only be described as a welcome party. "This is incredible," Tom said to his recorder. "I've discovered an intelligent species living on Verdania. They seem to have adapted not just to survive in this environment, but to work with it. Their saliva contains compounds that neutralize the atmospheric toxins that have been making me sick. They're not just surviving here, they're thriving." The creatures seemed to understand that Tom was different from them, but they didn't treat him as a threat or an outsider. Instead, they began showing him around their community with obvious pride. They had built homes that grew from the jungle itself, using some kind of biological engineering that worked with the planet's natural systems rather than fighting against them. Their gardens produced fruits and vegetables that were unlike anything Tom had ever seen. But when one of the creatures offered him a sample, it tasted better than any food from Earth. The same compounds that made Verdania's environment so hostile to outsiders seemed to create incredibly rich and complex flavors when properly processed. They're not just intelligent, Tom realized. They're farmers. They've turned this jungle into a paradise. By the end of his 4th day, Tom had acquired what could best be described as an adopted family. Rex remained his closest companion, but he had also been accepted by Spot, who had bioluminescent patches that made him easy to identify, Blue, whose scales stayed a constant azure color, and Chief, a larger individual who seemed to be some kind of leader. They showed him which plants were safe to eat, which water sources were clean, and how to move through the jungle without triggering its aggressive responses. In return, Tom shared his knowledge with them, showing them tools and concepts from his own world that they found fascinating. Most remarkably, they began to teach him their language. It was a complex combination of sounds, color changes in there, scales, and chemical signals that Tom's human nose could barely detect. But he was learning, and they were remarkably patient teachers. Day 4. Final log. Tom recorded as he settled down to sleep in a comfortable nest that the creatures had built for him. "I'm starting to understand that Verdania isn't a hostile world at all. It's a paradise that has evolved incredibly sophisticated defenses against contamination. The creatures here aren't just surviving. They've created a civilization based on working with their environment rather than fighting it." He looked around at his new friends, who were settling down for the night in their own nests nearby. Rex was curled up close enough to Tom that he could reach out and pet the creature's color-changing scales. "The Galactic Council has no idea what they've been missing," Tom continued. "This isn't a world to be conquered or avoided. It's a world to be learned from. And I think these creatures have been waiting a very long time for someone to understand that." As Tom drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the sounds of a jungle that no longer seemed threatening, he began to plan what he would take back to the Council. Because he was beginning to realize that Verdania had far more to offer the galaxy than anyone had ever imagined. Tom's 5th day on Verdania began with Rex gently shaking him awake by tugging on his shirt sleeve. The little creature's scales were bright yellow with excitement, and he kept making urgent chirping sounds while looking toward the edge of the clearing. "What is it, boy?" Tom asked, sitting up and stretching. He had slept better in the alien nest than he had in any bed back on Earth. The materials the creatures used seemed to adjust to his body perfectly, providing exactly the right support in all the right places. Rex ran a few steps toward the jungle, then looked back at Tom and chirped again. Chief appeared from his own nest and approached Tom with what looked like a small backpack made from woven plant fibers. The larger creature's scales showed patterns of blue and green that Tom had learned meant important journey ahead. "You want me to come with you somewhere special," Tom said, understanding their body language better each day. "Something you've been saving to show me." Both creatures brightened their scales and made happy sounds. Soon, Spot and Blue had joined them, along with several other community members Tom had met over the past 2 days. They were all carrying packs and showing the same excited colors. Tom gathered his remaining human supplies, which weren't much after 5 days in the jungle. His scientific equipment was mostly dead, but his sample containers were still functional. More importantly, He had learned to see Verdania through his new friend's eyes, and what he saw was nothing like the hostile wasteland described in Galactic Council reports. The group left the clearing and followed trails that Tom would never have seen on his own. The creatures moved through the jungle with perfect knowledge of its rhythms and patterns. They knew which plants were safe to touch, which areas to avoid during certain times of day, and how to read the chemical signals that the jungle used to communicate with itself. After 2 hours of walking, they reached something that made Tom stop and stare in amazement. The jungle opened into a vast valley filled with agricultural terraces that stretched as far as he could see. Row after row of carefully tended crops grew in soil that sparkled with mineral wealth. The same compounds that had nearly killed Tom during his first days were being used as incredibly sophisticated fertilizers. "This is impossible," Tom whispered, then corrected himself. "No, this is brilliant. You've turned the planet's natural toxins into the foundation for agriculture." Rex ran ahead to one of the terraces and began showing Tom the plants growing there. They looked like nothing from Earth, but when Rex offered Tom a sample fruit, it was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. The flavor was complex and rich in ways that no Earth plant had ever achieved, with layers of sweetness and nutrition that seemed to unfold in his mouth. Chief led Tom to another section where root vegetables grew in soil so rich it glowed softly in the dim jungle light. Blue showed him grain plants that produced more food per square foot than the most advanced Earth crops. Everywhere Tom looked, he saw abundance beyond anything he had imagined possible. "How do you process all this?" Tom asked, gesturing at the vast agricultural system. In response, his guides led him deeper into the valley, toward what looked like a series of hills covered in flowering vines. But as they got closer, Tom realized these weren't hills at all. They were massive biological structures built into the landscape itself, processing and refining the jungle's chemical wealth on an industrial scale. Inside the first structure, Tom found chambers filled with pools of liquid that his old suit sensors would have identified as deadly acid. But here, these pools were carefully maintained biological factories, producing compounds that could revolutionize medicine, agriculture, and materials science. The creatures had learned to work with Verdania's natural chemistry rather than fighting against it, creating a civilization based on biological engineering that was centuries ahead of anything the Galactic Council had achieved. "This changes everything," Tom said to his recorder. "What we thought were toxic waste products are actually the most sophisticated chemical processes I've ever seen. These beings have created an industrial base that produces no waste, causes no pollution, and works in perfect harmony with their environment." Rex and his friends spent the rest of the day showing Tom the full extent of their civilization. There were libraries where knowledge was stored in living crystals that grew from the cave walls, workshops where tools were cultivated rather than manufactured, transportation systems that used the jungle's own route networks to move people and goods across vast distances. Most remarkably, there were nurseries where the creatures were growing new versions of their crops specifically designed to thrive on different types of worlds. They had been preparing for contact with other species for generations, developing plants that could bring Verdania's abundance to any planet with suitable conditions. "You've been waiting for us," Tom realized as he watched young creatures learning to tend seedlings that were clearly designed for different atmospheric conditions. "You've been preparing for the day when you could share all this with the galaxy." Chief's scales showed patterns that Tom had learned meant hope and friendship. The large creature approached him with something that looked like a seedling, but as Tom examined it more closely, he realized it was far more sophisticated than any plant he knew. Its roots were wrapped in a ball of Verdania's mineral-rich soil, and its stems showed the same adaptive characteristics he had seen in the creatures themselves. "This is a gift," Tom understood, "a way to grow Verdania's abundance on other worlds." The creature nodded in the very human gesture he had taught them, then made sounds that Tom was beginning to understand as their word for galaxy. The meaning was clear. This wasn't just a gift for Tom or for humanity. This was an offering to all the species in the Galactic Council, a chance to transform agriculture across dozens of worlds. On his 6th day, Tom's new friends showed him something even more remarkable. They were already growing crops specifically designed for the dietary needs of other species. Using biological samples they had collected from previous council expeditions to other worlds, they had developed plants that could provide perfect nutrition for beings as different as the crystal-based hegemony and the energy-feeding ethereals. How? Did you know what they needed? Tom asked. Chief led him to a chamber filled with what could only be described as biological computers. Living organisms that processed information, stored data, and ran complex calculations about the nutritional and environmental needs of hundreds of different species. The creatures had been studying the galaxy's inhabitants for decades, preparing to offer them exactly what each species needed to thrive. But the most amazing discovery came on Tom's 7th morning, his last day on Verdania. Rex approached him, with his scales showing colors that Tom had never seen before. A complex pattern that seemed to contain sadness, hope, and something that looked like a question. "You want to come with me?" Tom realized. "You want to meet the council yourself?" Rex chirped excitedly and was joined by Spot, Blue, and several others. They had prepared travel packs and were showing every sign of beings ready for a journey. Chief approached with a larger pack that contained what appeared to be a comprehensive collection of seeds, samples, and biological data that could transform galactic agriculture. "The council is going to be very surprised," Tom said, checking his own pack one final time. "They sent me here expecting me to die or at least come back with proof that Verdania was too dangerous for galactic use. Instead, I'm bringing back representatives of a civilization that could revolutionize how we think about sustainable agriculture and environmental harmony." He looked around the clearing one last time, at the community that had adopted him and the jungle that had become his temporary home. Verdania wasn't the hostile wasteland the council believed it to be. It was a paradise inhabited by beings who had solved problems that the galaxy's greatest minds had never even thought to address. "Time to go show the galaxy what they've been missing," Tom said to his friends. Rex and his companions made sounds of excitement and determination. They were ready to leave their beautiful hidden world and share its wonders with species they had only studied from a distance. The return journey to Tom's landing site was a celebration. Everywhere they went, creatures came out to see them off, adding their own gifts to the collection Tom was taking back to the council. By the time they reached his ship, which had been completely absorbed into the jungle and turned into a small hill covered with flowering vines, Tom's group had grown to nearly 50 individuals representing a dozen different species from Verdania's hidden civilization. The Galactic Council chamber had never seen anything like what walked through its doors exactly 7 days after Tom Bradley left for Verdania. The security guards at the entrance stood frozen in shock as the strange parade entered the massive meeting hall. Tom walked in first, looking healthier and more energetic than when he had left. His clothes were different now, made from materials that seemed to shift color in the light. Behind him came creatures that had never appeared in any galactic database, moving with intelligence and purpose that was immediately obvious to everyone watching. Rex trotted beside Tom like a loyal companion, his scales showing bright patterns of gold and blue that somehow conveyed happiness and excitement even to species that had never seen such colors before. Spot bounded along nearby, leaving faint glowing footprints on the chamber's polished floor. Blue perched on Tom's shoulder, chittering softly at the assembled representatives, while Chief walked with the dignified bearing of someone attending an important diplomatic function. But what really shocked the council was the size of Tom's group. Nearly 50 different creatures followed them into the chamber, each one clearly intelligent and carrying carefully packed bundles of what appeared to be scientific samples and gifts. Ambassador Trell's 4 eyes went wide with disbelief. His 8 legs clicked nervously on the floor as he struggled to process what he was seeing. "Impossible," he whispered, his translator making his voice sound mechanical and frightened. "Nothing survives Verdania. Nothing lives there except death." Tom smiled and gestured to his companions. "Ambassador Trell, members of the Council, I'd like you to meet the citizens of Verdania. As you can see, there's quite a lot of life on that moon. Intelligent, friendly, and very advanced life." The chamber erupted in confused chatter as hundreds of different species tried to understand what they were seeing. Translators worked overtime as representatives demanded explanations in dozens of different languages. Quex, the tall crystal being, managed to speak first. "Human Tom, these creatures, they came from Verdania, the toxic moon that kills everything?" "That's what I thought too," Tom replied, scratching Rex behind what appeared to be ears. "Turns out we were all wrong about what Verdania actually is. It's not a toxic wasteland. It's the most advanced agricultural and biological research center I've ever seen, run by beings who have spent generations learning how to work with their environment instead of fighting it." He gestured to Chief, who approached one of the chambers. Computer terminals. With surprising skill, the large creature began operating the controls, displaying images and data from Tom's mission on the main viewing screens around the room. The first image showed Verdania's vast agricultural terraces, stretching across valleys filled with impossible abundance. The second showed the biological processing facilities that turned the moon's natural chemistry into useful products. The third showed creatures of dozens of different species working together in harmony with their environment. "The compounds that dissolve our technology," Tom explained as the images continued, "are actually part of an incredibly sophisticated biological system. Verdania's ecosystem doesn't attack foreign objects because it's hostile. It breaks them down because it's trying to prevent contamination of a closed biological cycle that has taken millions of years to perfect." Dr. Carter, watching from the human delegation, felt her scientific mind struggling to process the implications. The atmospheric readings, the chemical compositions, the biological diversity, everything they had interpreted as signs of a dead world were actually indicators of the most complex living system anyone had ever discovered. "But how did you survive the initial exposure?" asked Zara, the floating jellyfish-like representative of the ethereal collective. "Our projections suggested that the atmospheric conditions alone would be fatal within minutes." Tom's grin widened. "That's the beautiful thing about being human. We evolved on a planet that spent millions of years trying to kill us in every way possible. Diseases, predators, climate changes, natural disasters. Earth threw everything it had at early humans. The survivors were the ones who could adapt to anything." He pulled out one of his sample containers, now filled with fruits that glowed softly, with internal light. "What you call toxins, these friends call nutrients. The same compounds that dissolved my equipment made the most delicious and nutritious food I've ever tasted, once I learned how to process them properly." Rex chose that moment to approach Ambassador Trell, who backed away in obvious fear. But instead of any aggressive action, Rex simply sat down and began making the purring harmonic sound that Tom had learned was a greeting of friendship. "Your companion appears to be attempting communication," observed Zara, her ethereal form shimmering with interest. "The acoustic patterns suggest complex emotional content." "They're not just intelligent," Tom said proudly. "They're empathic. Their entire civilization is based on emotional and chemical communication networks that allow them to work together in ways we never imagined possible. They've been isolated on Verdania for so long that meeting new species is incredibly exciting for them." Chief had finished setting up the data displays and was now showing detailed biological and chemical analyses of Verdania's resources. The numbers were staggering. Agricultural yields that exceeded anything achieved by any known civilization. medical compounds that could revolutionize treatment for dozens of different species, materials science applications that could advance technology by centuries. "This is impossible," Trell said again, but his voice was weaker now. "Our surveys showed nothing but death and toxicity." "Your surveys were looking for the wrong things," Tom replied gently. "You were looking for environments that could support your existing technology and biology. You weren't looking for environments that had evolved their own solutions to survival." He gestured to his companions, who had spread out around the chamber and were approaching different species representatives with obvious curiosity and friendliness. "These beings have been preparing for galactic contact for generations. They've developed crops specifically designed for the nutritional needs of dozens of different species. They've created biological systems that could solve resource problems on hundreds of worlds." Spot had found his way to a group of mechanical beings from the synthetic collective and was studying their technology with fascination. When one of them extended a metal appendage, Spot responded by gently touching it with his own paw, causing his bioluminescent patches to pulse in patterns that somehow conveyed greeting and interest. "They're already trying to establish communication protocols," Tom observed. "These beings are natural diplomats. Their entire society is based on cooperation and mutual benefit." The real shock came when Chief approached Ambassador Trell directly, carrying a small package wrapped in what appeared to be living cloth. Despite Trell's obvious fear, the large creature gently placed the package on the floor and stepped back, his scales showing colors that clearly indicated a peaceful offering. "What is it?" Trell asked nervously. Tom translated Chief's response. "It's a gift specifically prepared for your species. They analyzed the biological data from your previous expeditions and developed crops that could thrive in your homeworld's environment while providing perfect nutrition for your dietary needs. They want to share Verdania's abundance with everyone." The package contained seeds that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, along with detailed biological instructions written in a script that was somehow immediately understandable to anyone who looked at it. Similar gifts were being presented to every species in the chamber. The Verdanians had come prepared not just to meet the galaxy, but to offer each species exactly what it needed most. "The vote we were supposed to take today was whether to admit humanity to the Galactic Trade Network," said Quex, his crystal form flickering with amazement. "But what we're really deciding is whether to welcome an entirely new form of civilization into our community." Tom nodded. "Humanity wants to join your trade network, yes. But more than that, we want to serve as ambassadors between you and our friends here. Verdania doesn't just represent agricultural abundance. It represents a completely different way of thinking about how species can work together with their environments and with each other." Rex had made his way back to Tom and was looking up at him with obvious affection. Around the chamber, other Verdanians were making friends with representatives from dozens of different species, establishing the first interspecies contacts through gestures, sounds, and shared curiosity. "So," Tom said, looking around the chamber at the remarkable scene unfolding around them, "about that trade network membership." The vote was not just unanimous, it was enthusiastic. For the first time in Galactic Council history, the decision was made not just to admit a new species, but to establish an entirely new category of membership for civilizations based on biological partnership rather than technological dominance. Ambassador Trell, holding his gift package with trembling appendages, looked up at Tom with something that might have been respect. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. "How did you see what we all missed?" Tom smiled and looked down at Rex, who had curled up at his feet with obvious contentment. "Because humans have learned that the most dangerous-looking places often hide the most beautiful possibilities. We've learned to look for life where others see only death, and to find friends where others see only enemies." The chamber filled with sounds of celebration as representatives from dozens of worlds began making plans for the first intergalactic agricultural and biological exchange program in known history. Verdania would share its abundance and knowledge, while the galaxy would share its diversity and friendship. And at the center of it all, one human sat surrounded by his adopted alien family, knowing that he had not just passed a test, but had opened a door between worlds that would change everything forever. Rex purred contentedly, his scales showing. The warm, gold color that Tom had learned meant home and family and love. The galaxy had just become a much bigger, more wonderful, and more connected place than anyone had ever imagined possible.